Chapter 17, Ovaltine. The girl who said she didn't want anything to do with them balanced on the doorstep. In you go, Ida, darling. They won't bite. Well, fingers might. Jin gently nudged her inside, where the girl nervously stood on the edge of the rug, clutching a shopping bag. Fingers picked up an empty sack from under the table and screwed it up tight in her fist. I'm going out. Brian put up a hand. Fingers, I need some more pads. It started again the other day, and I only had one last month. We'll all be needing them at the same time soon, darling. Better get a stock, said Jin, kicking off her high heels. And some sanitary bouts, for the pads. Those new disposable ones. Get me a large one if you can. Baby frowned. She wasn't ready to accept that she was a girl like that. She was a girl, of course. There was nothing she could do about that. But a girl, one like Jin with fancy drawers and wavy hair and all the rest of it, she couldn't imagine being one like that, not on your Nelly. Jin waved her arm elegantly. Oh, it was dreadful at school. For practically 1 week every month, we were all as prickly as hedgehogs. Surprising no one got seriously hurt, actually. Well, Bunty did fall off the gym roof, but that wasn't my fault. All right, I got the message. Fingers took her ripped jacket off the hook, but stood on the rug next to Ida, looking her up and down as if she was trying to make her mind up about Purse Girl once and for all. Jin took off the rest of her Aunt Constance clothes and threw them in the room bed. She wrapped herself in her satin dressing gown and flopped into one of the chairs by the stove. Oh, Ida, I was forgetting about you. Jin got up, grabbed Ida's shoulders and guided her to the table where Baby was sitting with Brian. Ida Barnes's mac was too short, and her dress underneath it wasn't much longer. Her legs were spindly and streaked with a dash of motor oil. Her short hair looked like she'd tried to brush it, and her face was halfway between frowning and smiling. She opened her mouth a couple of times to say something, then shut it again. When it was obvious that whatever she wanted to say was going to stay unsaid, Baby pulled out a chair at the table. Sit down, why don't you? This here's Brian. Brian smiled up at the awkward girl. My dad's machine, she said proudly, showing off the bits and pieces from her dad's box. She was sorting lumps of glass cut like diamonds, nuts and bolts and brass shapes, comparing each one to a tatty old wad of paper she held in her hand. Brian, isn't that a boy's name? Ida spoke at last. It's my name, said Brian. I chose it. Oh, all right then. Baby was still holding the chair, waiting for Ida's backside. Have something to eat. Brian's learning how to cook. It's sandwiches today. Brian carefully put her dad's bits and pieces back in the box. Ida swallowed and said, That would be really nice, thank you. And only hesitated for a second or two before she finally sat down on Baby's chair. Well, I ain't going out if you're all eating. Fingers dropped her sack by the door and shoved Baby over to one half of her chair and sat on the other half with her. Ida peered into Brian's box. Do you have any tools? No, just bits. My dad wants me to look after them until he comes home. Brian took a small mountain of sandwiches out of the cupboard. Where is he? Asked Ida. Brian's smile faded as she put the plate in the middle of the table. He's in the asylum, darling, said Jin, though he's no madder than you or I. Ida took a deep breath and lowered her eyes. My dad died because he did go a bit mad, she said quietly. He couldn't stop thinking about the war. Maybe if he'd been in the asylum, he wouldn't have done it. Then she looked up. Tears were collecting in her eyes. What did he do? Asked Jin gently, pulling out her chair at the table and sitting down. Ida pressed her lips shut like there was something she wanted to say but couldn't. She gripped her hands together in her lap so tight her knuckles went white. At last she said, He hanged himself on the stairs. I found him. Corned beef sandwiches balanced halfway to hungry mouths. It was one thing to lose a parent, but for that parent to lose themselves on purpose was something else. "He must have been very unhappy," said Jin, resting her hand kindly on Ida's arm. "He kept hearing guns," said Ida. "The war never stopped for him. I wish I could remember him alive. I'm trying, but it's too hard." Brian pushed the sandwiches closer to Ida. "They're nice," she whispered. "They're corned beef." Ida took one and nibbled at the edges. To Baby, it was like Ida had finally been able to clear whatever it was that stuck in her throat. The uppityness about her loosened a little. "Well, I best be off then." Fingers slid off Baby's chair. "Sorry about your dad," she said under her breath, and dragged the back of her hand across her eyes before she picked up her sack and strode out into the chilly evening. "Ida, it was me who wrote to you," Baby said, as gently as she could, but couldn't hide the little bit of pride she felt in herself for writing a letter. "Your Baby, the apple thief," said Ida. "One way of putting it." Ida tipped her head to one side. "Where did that girl go with that sack?" "About your sister," said Baby. "It's a mistake," said Ida. "I'm going to be 14 on Saturday, and that's old enough to look after her. It's what our mother wanted. Thank you very much for your help, but I'm sure I'll be all right." She sniffed and half stood up to go. "I'm 14. My birthday is the 7th of August, 1922. Brian took hold of Ida's hand. "Don't go yet." Baby needed this girl. "Have we got some pud today, Brian?" she asked, hoping it would persuade Ida to stay. "Oh, no!" Brian slapped her forehead. "Not to worry, darling." Jin stood up and laid 2 reassuring hands on Brian's shoulders before she opened cupboard doors one by one. "Where's that tin of Ovaltine? We could have some of that. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for bed. Ida, you are staying, aren't you?" "We haven't got any milk," said Brian, still looking worried. "That's all right. We'll just have a sniff then. That smell takes me back to school." "You said school was awful," said Brian. "It was, and I hated it, but the larks we had I loved. Ah, here it is." Jin prized the lid off with her fingers and took a great big sniff. She said, "That's delicious." She licked her finger, dipped it in the tin like it was sherbet, then put her finger in her mouth. "Yummy! Some sugar wouldn't go amiss, but oh!" She swayed dizzily. "That's made me feel a bit peculiar. I think I need a little nap." Jin dropped the lid. It rattled on the floor as she staggered over to the mattresses in the room bed. A few seconds later, a giant snore rumbled out from behind the wall. "I'm not sure Ovaltine's meant to work that well," said Ida.